Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see a nice sized group here today. Uh, uh, Henry Ford is certainly one of the most important historical figures of the state of Michigan, and yet people know very little about his school system. Our presenter today is Dick Haight, and he attended Ford's Greenland Academy near Tecumseh, Michigan. He has earned a BA in English from Michigan State University. He worked for AT&T Bell Labs out in New Jersey on Unix operating systems in the fields of computer graphics and interactive systems. And he also worked afterwards at Clemson University doing some of the same things. Dick lives just south of Douglas, Michigan. And without further ado, we'll go to our speaker, Fred Haight. Fred,
yeah.
Dick.
Dick. Yeah,
Another
right.
senior moment.
Yes, right. Well, that you get what you pay for here. I had a senior moment about driving most of the way to Haas without the content for this talk. So I had to go back and do it on my laptop. Anyway, back in, my first slide shows children coming out of the reconstructed McGuffey School at Greenfield Village. If you Google Ford schools these days, all you get is a list of schools named after Ford, but between 1928 and 1945, he ran a school system on his own, run at his own particular whim, and spent probably a lot of money on it. Let's see, let me see, I can get the next slide. Oops.
So you're going to want to either press return or use your toggle switches. And it's sensitive. I don't know why it's not consistent, but go ahead and press return once for me.
Okay.
Okay,
All
and
right,
now you should be able to toggle between them.
Okay. So the sources for the talk, mostly my memories. I visited the Benson Ford Research Center at Greenfield Village. I talked to a couple other students, but mainly the content comes from a publication that every student that attended one of these schools got every other week, a 20-page little paper called the Herald. And that's my main content. And here's, at the end of each year, we got a bound set. So they did 50 weeks, 20 pages a piece. So we got a 500-page book, like the one in this picture, once a year. I had these books myself, but my mother kept them after I graduated from college, and her house was flooded in Florida and she threw them away. Just to get this out of the way, because I think the schools and Henry's problem with Jews have something to do with each other. Sometime in the teens of the last century, he bought the Dearborn Independent Weekly, and he published thousands of copies every week, and he sent them free to every Ford dealership. And then in 1927, the precursor to the Anti-Defamation League lawyers took him to court, and Henry lost. And he had to admit that he'd printed lies. And for some reason, right then, he started his schools. This is some of what Henry said here about the Jewish race, and my snide remark below it that 0.3% of the world's population have ended up winning 20% of the Nobel Prizes. So anyway, so that happened in 27 and 28. Miraculously, he started his schools. And the reason I went to one was that I was growing up in Tecumseh, Michigan, and the state was allowing the school systems to drop kindergarten to save money during the Depression. And so apparently, if your parents were wise enough to do this, you could get into a Ford school simply by asking. Now, over the years, I had always assumed that my parents paid for this, but I've learned recently that it was all free. So I ended up for what was called pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, going to Green Lane Academy, which is southeast of the town of Tecumseh. We were bused in the opposite direction of most busing. We were bused town to country. And the school was already there. I would say 90% of Henry's schools, he just took over abandoned country, one-room country schools. Here's this is my second year at Green Lane. You can see that it's the classic Michigan country school, 3 windows on the side, a window on the front and the door. It was built into the side of a hill. The tallish kid, 3 from the right end with a little line under him, that was me. And my little girlfriend from around the block, Kathy, that's her with the other little line under. The children that went to this, at least the ones that I maintained contact with, all were pretty successful. You know, everybody went to college. Certainly not everybody did in those days, but anyway, so you can see that it's an open setting. In the background at the bottom, there's a pump that we played with and got each other wet with, I'm sure. And then there's wetlands that go off to the Raisin River, and we did many, many field trips. So here's a sign-up sheet for that year. My name is marked, has a little red arrow. And there's a clip from the Herald. The Herald paper every week had articles from some of the schools. Maybe a quarter of the schools had a half a column or a column in the paper. And this little chunk was from the same period. And you can see that I'm quoted at the bottom here. It asks if I said I had something nice at home, it's a sweater and it's so cute to wear. It's wonderful hearing myself quoting my mother 80 years on. Oh, and it's signed by somebody named Margaret Papp. We had 2 teachers, an academic teacher and the second teacher who supervised the playground and made lunch. So as I said before, there was nothing to pay for. You just had to show up with a doctor's note that said that the school or that the child was sound. We were bused every day, both ways. The school wasn't like a normal kindergarten. We got there at 9 and we went back home at 3:30. We were fed lunch. My mother was bitter about the fact that I liked the cook, the cooking teacher better than her food. And she said it's because in the Depression, that woman didn't care what it cost. The academic teacher name was Miss Doby, and I've tried over the years to figure out whatever happened to her because I was in love with her and it wasn't, it wasn't platonic. The other thing that Henry insisted on was that everybody worked and you worked every day. I have, we set tables, we cleared tables, we washed and dried dishes, and we picked up stuff in the classroom and out in the playground. So this is the sort of schedule. We got there at 9 from the bus. Miss Dobie did the usual stuff for kindergarten content of that era. We had a recess, and unless it was really terrible weather, we went out. It didn't matter whether it was 0 or not. Oh, by the way, the teachers had an indoor toilet, and I suppose if you were sick, you might be able to use it, but Henry maintained beautiful white painted outhouses for the girls and boys. Anyway, so then we had lunch, went back to Miss Dobie, another recess, and finally Miss Dobie, we had milk and story time, and the 3:30 the bus took us home. So here's a couple of pictures. The kid looking down on the left is me eating lunch. And I don't have a picture of me and my friend Kathy doing dishes at Green Lane, but this is the same thing that the McGuffey kids did. I remember that the sink was a normal height and we stood on little boxes. And I have a vivid memory of taking a soapy dish and handing it to my friend Kathy. This is another oddity. Henry wasn't very worried about safety. In the normal run of things, the school had central heating, but on cold days, we fired up a wood stove, and under that stove, you can see wet mittens that are being dried, and there's no protection around the stove. Everybody just put up with this. And I remember that kid, he always had a runny nose, always. The other thing that we did was that we were constantly working on programs. It wasn't just, we were always in some sort of group activity. So this is twice a year at least, we went to the nearest high school that Henry ran in Macon, Michigan, and put on a show. And the stars, of course, are my friends over on the right, and I'm in the dumb dandelion costume with the arrow pointed at my head. Now, I know that my mother sewed that costume, but Henry handed out the material. I think you can see that there's this cheap, shiny material on everybody, and everybody's mother sewed up a costume. And again, about the safety, we had very interesting toys or playground stuff. There were inside of wooden boxes, and the biggest ones would have held at least 3 kids. And the boys tended to make these into forts and play cowboys and Indians. And certainly some of the girls played that part of the game. And the girls turned them on their sides and made houses. And I can remember sitting with some girls in these things, drinking pretend tea out of the little teacups that they brought. The other thing is that the kids were allowed to bring toys to school. That would never happen now. In fact, I remember bringing a sticker gun style bow and arrow as an Indian to shoot at the cowboys. Yes, and as I mentioned, the other things. So here we are doing another program. You can see mothers in the background. That's me in the very short pants. And the woman whose name was embossed on the Herald book in the slide that showed that's her across from me. She was a year ahead of me at Green Lane, so this is my pre-kindergarten year. And she was always 2 years ahead of me in school. So I think her parents wisely had her skip first grade, because when I left the Ford schools and went into first grade, I was the only one in my class that had had a kindergarten. So first grade was basically kindergarten all over again. And it sort of ruined my whole attitude to public school. As I said, we were always doing these presentations, and here's a poor child in the middle. She'll never get over blackface doing little Liza at one of the other schools. And I did too. I mentioned the field trips. Many, many nice days in the fall and spring. We would go out and explore the land behind the school. And it shows over here, says toward the bottom of this thing, it's the teachers sort of complaining that the children catch animals and that the children enjoyed them more than the animals. And says, and I remember the owl that's mentioned here precisely. Anyway, the woman says the children liked it better than the animals liked the children. So where were Henry's schools? Well, the big bunch of them were in southwestern Michigan near Greenfield Village. But he also had schools in Pequaming in the Upper Peninsula. I'll get to that. And in Georgia, he had several schools, and out in Massachusetts. And the one that really confused me for a long time is called convalescent. Oh, well, here, this is about Pequaming. This is so at some point, Henry wanted wood for the wooden floors and sides of stake trucks and things like that. You know, the Ford philosophy was vertical integration of manufacturing. He wanted all of the piece parts from the bottom to the top. So he bought some acreage in the Upper Peninsula. I believe it was 40,000 acres. And he harvested wood for his factory. And he had his own boat, the Henry Ford II, you know, a lake steamer. And it pulled into the wharf at Pequaming and went all the way by water to up the Rouge River and left the wood there, and all in Henry's domain. And since he bought that acreage for the stuff, he essentially bought the town and started a whole bunch of schools, including several one-room schools and a high school. I would think that there was perhaps 300 students total during this. This is a funny one. It's the end of the school year, but it's still cold and the kids are sort of bundled up. And a girl named Tellefson wins the tricycle race, which is sort of typical of that area of the UP. And so this is where I finally figured out convalescent, because it says Henry Ford Hospital under it, but it didn't normally. Apparently, if you were a student, and I think at the height of this, the total student count was probably 2,500 or so. But if you got sick, you went to the Ford Hospital and they kept you up on your studies. And in the article and that picture, both of these girls had been there 4 years. Can you imagine this being free? But it was. Anyway, it's kind of interesting what you can do if you throw money at the problem. Here's some more quotes, including me about being blackface as Little Black Sambo. I was mentioned at least 6 or 7 times in the 2 years that I was at Green Lane. Oh, yeah, well, why did he have schools in Massachusetts and Georgia? Well, Henry had a summer place in Maine, and every time he drove by this Longfellow's Wayside Inn, he decided that he ought to start a school there, I guess. And he actually tried to have a first cut at what he managed at Greenfield Village, but that one wasn't so good. But anyway, he had several schools, including a high school that was for problem boys. And in Georgia, he had after he gave up his summer place in Fort Myers, Florida, he had one at Park Hill, Georgia, and he started a bunch of schools there, including high school. And kind of surprisingly, I think you can tell vaguely here that the kids in these two Georgia schools are all Black. It wasn't integrated, but he was educating them. And it never says in any of the write-ups what the race of the children were. They were just described as everybody else. And this wasn't the only place. This is at Clinton Inn, which is now called Eagle Tavern at Greenfield Village. And as you can see, the teachers are all white in the back, but the kids, I mean, it's a little too bad that they're all dressed as Aunt Jemima, but they're Black. So, and these are a bunch of the other schools. I think it's amusing that how many of the rural schools are the same. Look at the two on to the left side, two windows in front, three along the side. Anyway, the fancy one that with the Doric columns is at Macon, Michigan, which is practically a ghost town now. And Pequaming, the only thing that's left in the UP at Pequaming is Henry's, 7-bedroom cottage. So here's something about Henry's goals. At least, you're just getting it from me, of course. He obviously liked one-room schools. Unlike the teachers who were working in Tecumseh at the time I was going there, he paid his teachers actual cash money. And in Tecumseh, I don't know what the proportion was exactly, but part of the teacher's salary was in some kind of script that could only be spent in Tecumseh. So, we had really good teachers all through it. Everybody had to work. He was interested in the play equipment that encouraged creativity and didn't worry about safety. However, the second teacher was always there. There's amazing amount of year-round stuff. That first picture of my classmates in front of the school wasn't taken on a school day. It was taken at the beginning of August because we were all set then. He actually, there was an article in the Herald that it said 2 boys wanted to work at the demonstration farm at Macon, and they were bused to Rouge River, given a physical, and they were hoeing beans by afternoon, and they were getting paid. Also, the high school kids at that school all got swimming lessons and were bused to the state park at Wampers Lake. The grade schools, probably through 7th or 8th grade, were strictly unisex, but the high schools were definitely industrial arts for the boys and home ec for the girls. That was the times. The kids at these places got to use interesting equipment. That high school girl throwing that pot, that's pretty advanced pottery. And especially the kids that were at Greenfield Village, any of the equipment, the scientific equipment or the old machinery, they got to play with, including this 1742 era printing press. Oh, this is funny. When I finished kindergarten, my folks had moved so that the first grade was exactly a block from my house. There was a first grade through 8th grade at the other end of town, and I'm still kind of mad at my parents for not sending me there, and letting me go to the nearby school. But at the Brownville school at the other end of town, the kids had a summer garden big enough to sell at a stand. And there's an article in the Herald that said that on one occasion, at least, they oversold what they were supposed to get back, and they were allowed to take the excess to buy ice cream cones. So, and here they are in these two pictures at Greenfield Village, harvesting potatoes. You realize that getting kids that young to do this stuff took a lot of adult supervision. So, there was, he was paying to get this done. So besides the schools, and I'll have a little more yet to say, but Henry had some other hobby projects. He started something called Village Industries. And there was one in my hometown, and I was aware of one in Brooklyn, Michigan. There's one in Saline near Ann Arbor and at Willow Run. In total, there were 20 of these plants. And I wonder if it was Henry trying to make up for the, brain numbing size of the Rouge plant. In addition to that, he bought up probably tens of thousands of acres of farmland that had been abandoned during the Depression. He was involved in something that started in Tecumseh called dynamic kernels. It was something started by a Quaker in my hometown that I always thought made a lot of money off from it. And of course, his big thing was Greenfield Village. Let's see. Oh yeah, the final years. So Henry was incapacitated. It's not exactly clear whether it was heart attacks or strokes in 44 and 45, died in 47. And believe me, the people left, closed everything down in a hurry. They threw every acre of that farmland on the market at the same time. It must have depressed the cost or the value of farmland in southeastern Michigan for years. One of the things I was kind of disappointed in my work with this was the Benson Ford Research Center at Greenfield Village. Benson Ford was the third son of Edsel Ford. And like Edsel, he didn't live to be very old. So if you want to go there and do research, you have to make an appointment. And without knowing what the possible categories are, you have to make a list of things you want to see. This reminds me of a quotation by the physicist Niels Bohr, who stated that if you don't know the answer to something, you can't properly pose the question, which was my problem when I went there. The clerks there were very pleasant, but the researchers I never got to meet. They're on a separate floor. You don't get to walk around in the aisles of the collection. Stuff is delivered to you on a cart. If you want more than 10 things, you have to turn something back in to get number 11. Couple of the things I really wanted was I wanted to know what Henry paid for all this. And I wanted to know if you're out to do a platinum version of public schooling, what's it cost? And they claimed to have no such information. I also want to know something about the teachers, and they also said that that they had no list of the teachers or when they served. Now, I find it difficult to believe that Henry didn't keep records of this. As far as I can tell, the only real college courses he ever took were in accounting. So I suspect that there's accurate stuff. Here's a picture that's related to my wife's family. It's a picture of Henry with Avery Shaw, who was my wife's great uncle, who was president of Denison College, now Denison University, in 1928. And it turned out that the Benson Ford place did not have this picture, but my wife's family did. But they had a diary of the photographer who followed Henry around. And so I knew exactly when and where this picture was taken. So I gave them the print and I, kept a digital copy. But, if he had a photographer that wrote down every single snapshot, I can't believe that they don't have accounting information or personnel information. I also suggested to them that, I went to the kindergarten in the late 30s. Anybody that graduated from high school has got to be in their mid to late 90s. If they ever wanted to write this thing up, which they said they would, or they did, they should have been doing it some time ago, because the people who actually went to this place like I did, even though I only had a couple of years, we're fast disappearing. So I'm kind of disappointed. I got the feeling, and again, this is just my personal snide view of things, that that this is a job there was a sinecure, that these people had a good deal and were in no danger of being fired. Anyway, that's essentially most of what I have to say about. Oh, I have one other story. Since I'd gone to this school for 2 years and bussed every single day, I went to the public school first grade, and when I got out of my classroom, being very disappointed in my first day of school, there was a school bus sitting there with its motor running and kids climbing in. So I went and got in the bus, and the bus driver had a list of students, and I told him my name, and he said, "I don't see your name here." And he said, "Where do you live?" I pointed out through the window. My house was clearly visible. I had trouble living that down. Anyway, that's about it. Since nobody interrupted me, somebody have some questions? Can't hear.
Thank you, Dick. Just make sure you unmute your mic and jump in at any time with questions.
Dick, did you have any kind of adjustment going to a public school after you left these schools?
Oh yeah, well, I was Miss Dobie, my beautiful teacher I was in love with, had me ready for second grade, not first grade. Plus, like I said, the first graders hadn't had kindergarten, so that's what we did for half the year, was catch them up with kindergarten. No, it didn't do my attitude any good. Anyway, that's there's one thing that happened my first year at Green Lane that the teacher, I'm sure, would have been glad I hadn't done. I went to Toledo with my mother on a Saturday at Christmas time and saw all the Santa Clauses. And on the way home, I quizzed her about, is Santa Claus real? And she wouldn't lie to me. So on Monday, I went to school and told all of the school kids there wasn't any Santa Claus. Somebody gave me a bloody nose, and the teacher and my mother had become friendly. And so she called my mother, and my mother managed to get her to cool down, but somehow that story didn't ever make it to the Herald. The other thing I forgot to mention is that my second year at Greenfield Village, Henry visited. And because my mother knew this teacher, she had been warned, so my mother was actually had actually shown up. And probably I'm mostly aware of this because I'm remembering what my mother remembered, but we all apparently sat on Henry's lap and talked to him. I don't specifically remember that. What I do remember is that Henry had a chauffeur in a big black Lincoln, and the chauffeur let me sit in the driver's seat and tried to turn the enormous non-power steering wheel. Oh, the other thing is that we all got free physicals at Ford Hospital our second year, and your mother had to go with you. Nobody ever mentioned fathers. And my mother and I went, and the teacher or the doctor said that I was going to have flat feet and it would keep me out of service. Turned out to be true. Anyway,
I had a couple
anybody have any
questions come
questions?
into the chat. The first one is, how long was your oh, actually, let me go back. That was not the first one. You have about 6 questions in here now. The first question is, were all buildings K through 12?
No, they were all over the place. For instance, in Tecumseh, there was the Green Lane with the pre-K and kindergarten, and there were 2. There was a 1st through 6th, and there was a 1st through 8th. And then in Macon, where the high school was, they did all the way from pre-K through high school. And the same way at Greenfield Village, there were half a dozen schools, and they did the whole thing the same way in Massachusetts and in Georgia. There were several schools, but he loved the old abandoned one-room schools, and he reused them as far as I know. He did build a few things. He built the gymnasium at Macon. By the way, after the schools closed in the 50s, I remember a picture, and I tried to find it online somewhere and was unsuccessful. I'm pretty sure it was either in the Detroit News or the Detroit Free Press, but there was a photograph taken in the gymnasium at Macon from the balcony, and it looked down on the floor, and the floor was absolutely covered with children in iron lungs from the polio epidemic. A very sad picture. Part of those buildings in Macon are used in a Catholic boys' school, but most of it's been just given up. Other
Thank
questions?
you. There's another question. Well, there's about 4 more questions. Was anti-Semitism taught in Ford's schools? And then a follow-up, were Jewish students enrolled in Ford's schools?
Well, I think that once Henry got stung with his lawsuit, it wasn't mentioned, right? There certainly weren't any. There was only one Jewish family in Tecumseh at the time, and their children were too old to go to that school. But I don't think that they were kept from going. No. My mother suggested that Henry, when we sat on his lap, he asked where we went to church. He wasn't thrilled with Catholics either.
Okay. How long was your bus ride every day?
Well, it probably wasn't more than 15 minutes. I mean, it couldn't have been more than 3 miles or so from my house to the school. They did bus in. Maybe a third of the kids in this class were from farms, and they got bused too, but a different bus.
Okay. Someone asked, what about discipline?
I don't remember being disciplined. I know one of the girls that was in the class with me, her older brother had some sort of mental deficiency, whatever the PC term is these days, that only showed up as he got older. And so she thought that the teacher that I thought was so wonderful was mean to him, as his problem occurred. He was a year ahead of me, so it wasn't something I was aware of. I'm sure not everybody had as wonderful an experience as I did. How, it doesn't work that way. Just
Okay.
fine for me.
There's a little bit of a follow-up to the anti-Semitism question. Did he incorporate his anti-Semitism beliefs into the curriculum of the schools?
No, but he really thought that the McGuffey reader was sort of the end all. I mean, I'm sure that the say the kids in the high schools didn't get anything very intellectual about their experience. I think he was trying to develop the perfect foreman for his factories and their dutiful, hardworking wives. On the other hand, the schools were extremely well provided for, and the high schools all had swimming pools, which were, just unheard of in that era.
Were McGuffey reading material the reason for the name of the schools? Were they used?
In part, yes. I don't think that they used the exact book. I'm sure that my teacher, with her 24 students, basically, I think that they didn't have the kind of rigid idea of what should be covered. Each of us did what we were interested in doing. By the time I was through there, I was pretty good at arithmetic and I could read. So.
Very good. I have a question. What was a typical school day like, either hour by hour or subject by subject?
Well, subject-wise, I don't really remember. I remember that we did the things that you would typically think of kindergartners do. We did a lot of artwork stuff. We worked on letters and numbers. Sounds like Sesame Street, but and we were always doing these group activities, much more so than it ever was in the public school. We were always practicing our parts for something. We had musical instruments and this kind of thing, and we were always competing in minor ways, not as individuals but as groups, to do things. And there were games, educational games. I know that one of my contemporaries complained about napping. Apparently, if the kids were tired, Miss Dobie made everybody lie down for the story period at the end. And this girl was resentful of that, but no, I think it was typical, except very hands-on. I don't remember anything particularly about the downstairs teacher and her hands on us in the playgrounds. I don't remember people complaining. I don't remember any bullying, although I certainly remember it once I got in the public schools. So somebody was controlling that carefully. And we had birthday parties. Our mothers came and brought cake and cookies, and the kids that had summer birthdays moved their birthdays to the school year. we were constantly doing stuff like this.
Okay, the next question is, my father went to a Henry Ford trade school. I think it was in Detroit. It was a high school. Do you know anything about this school?
No, but I know that that they existed. They weren't part of this other system, but yes.
Okay. If, as you say, Ford's purpose was potentially to provide the education he felt he wanted for employees, why are these schools not well known or publicly documented? Do you think it's purposefully hidden from sight?
Well, yeah, I think so in a way. I mean, I don't know why. And certainly they didn't run out of money, I don't think, although Henry ran the Ford Motor Company again, after Edsel died, and lost a lot of money during the war years. And so, I suppose the company wasn't on as sound a footing as it had been earlier, but they shut things down right in the middle of the year, I think, when Henry died.
Well, those were some great questions. I don't currently have anything else in the chat. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves and comment on what's already been discussed or ask a question, please do so. Is there anything you want to add, Dick? I can certainly wrap up the class early. I just want to give everybody a chance
Yeah.
to.
Well, I'll tell you one other. I ran across Henry face to face once more. So I mentioned earlier this thing called the dynamic kernels. So the Quaker who owned the flour mill in Tecumseh came up with a scheme where in 1940 he planted a cubic inch of wheat kernels, and at the end of the year he tithed 10% and replanted the rest the second year. And he was going to do this for 6 years. So it's going to run through 1946. And the couple of years, Henry provided, as you can tell, the number of acres that this took went up exponentially. So the first year, it was a 6-foot square plot. The next year it was an acre. The year after that, it was 20 or 30 acres. And the year after that, it was a couple thousand. Smooching. So the last year that Henry was well, it was 44. And he gave Perry Hayden, the Quaker I'm talking about, all of his land free and provided tractors and threshing machines and all this stuff. And I was at the ceremonial reaping of this harvest. And so they had replanted the cubic inch each year, and they took down the little picket fence and handed Henry a scythe, and he took off his coat. It was a really hot day, his suit coat, and I remember he had sleeve garters. Remember those? Keep the ink off the cuffs of your dress shirt. He grew up on a farm. He hadn't forgotten a thing. He knocked those things down with a scythe in about 3 swipes, and I don't think the professional photographers even got a picture. But the next year, they had to do without him, and they basically gave the seed away to all kinds of farmers to get it done, and the farmers, except for a tenth, got to keep it all. So anyway, and Perry Hayden got to mill all of the grain into flour, and then he and his family went around doing slideshows and wrote a book and everything else.
Thank you. A couple more things came into the chat. One is just a thank you from someone. Thank you for your presentation. It was so very interesting. think we all agree. And then as a Detroit-born person, born at Henry Ford Hospital, quite interesting. Thanks for this bit of history of an industrial leader. And then I have somebody that that commented that there are photos and some information on the Henry Ford Museum website. And maybe that, I'm
Yeah,
assuming
they
that,
do.
okay.
Right, yeah. There is some stuff there. It's not very, you know, it's spotty. And the scans from the Herald are kind of low res. One of the things that irritated me about the Benson Ford place is that when I asked for all this stuff, they didn't give me the Herald books. I only found out about them again by going to the Tecumseh Library. I mean, they have the complete set. They admitted that. You know, I had all these questions, but they didn't think to offer me the books.
You had another comment in the chat, just somebody who was also born at Henry Ford Hospital and loved your presentation. So
Oh, thanks.
you're already getting fabulous reviews.
Yes, one of my daughters was born at Henry Ford Hospital.
That's lovely. We're just right about it too. We do still have some time, but I won't belabor this if we feel like we've gotten all our questions answered. And if that's so, I'll give you about 10 seconds to chime in. Otherwise, we'll thank Dick for an absolutely wonderful presentation and for sharing his time and for operating with such grace under pressure as you were racing back home to.
Yeah, right. Talk about senior moments. Ugh.
Hey, going back and forth, not being able to be in the office every day, I have a senior moment twice a day of like a cord, or you know how it goes. But anyway, thank you all for joining. And thank you, Dick, for just a wonderful presentation. And thank you, Mike, for coordinating the course. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It was fun. Would have been better with everybody in the same room.
Soon, as soon as we can.